Hello everyone, and welcome to Mission Top today, and welcome to this live stream. Mission Top is a farmstead and ranch, it's a family, and it is also a place of ideas. And in that pursuit of ideas, I have been doing this ongoing series entitled Understanding Manhood, and today we'll be dealing with one of my favorite topics, and hopefully yours, men and sexuality, and I'm looking forward to this. As part of this ongoing series, I have been developing a definition of manhood in conjunction with you and your feedback, and the definition we've reached so far that I like to lead out each of these episodes with is that manhood is the earned status that society awards males for bearing the public responsibility of producing the resources that society needs that are not naturally likely to be produced, most commonly by being a provider, a procreator, and a protector, but adaptable to the needs of society. So today we'll be focusing especially on that procreator aspect. We've also been developing a symbol for manhood. I don't know if I'm satisfied with it just yet, but a symbol is something that you can look through and take its attributes to see something else. So we're looking through this symbol to see the attributes of manhood. Maybe we'll figure out a better one in the future, but for now, that symbol is the oak tree, a masculine tree, a tree that can be seen as the pillar of a community. That provides both protection and resources to the community, but it also offers up fruit, and in this case, seed, right? For new life and perpetuation of that community. So that is the definition and the symbol, and with that we will delve into today's material. So, given that we're dealing with the topic of sex, which can be so interesting but so fraught with danger, I have to give a warning for young viewers. I know I do have a few younger viewers, so this is the warning to check with parents or people that are supervising you to make sure that they're cool that you have this. I mean, I think overall it won't be too explicit. However, everybody has different standards with regards to discussions of sexuality, so I have to give that warning from the outset here. The first thing I wanted to do was delve into the natural tendencies of males with regard to sexuality, at least as I've observed and studied myself. And we're doing this because we've talked about how manhood is a social institution that takes natural male tendencies, which oftentimes don't work out to the benefit of others in a society, others in human relationships, right? And it channels those male tendencies that sometimes can be destructive, and instead takes that male tendency, the energy of males, and there's a lot of energy there, and tries to channel that into something like a game structure or a story structure or a reinforced pattern of behavior that works out better for everyone. And that's an important thing, is everyone, the male and everybody else. And so this institution turns that male gives him a special status, that of being a man, and rewards him with that status for channeling his energies into things that benefit everybody else. And it was interesting, the other day, maybe it was just yesterday, I received a comment on one of my videos, on the Gladiator video, that so many of you kind of was the gateway into this channel. And they said, so you're saying manhood is just about, serving men and sacrifice, or serving society and serving women and sacrificing them? Sounds like slavery to me. And I had to reply, not at all, right? Slavery is something that comes about by compulsion. It's compelled servitude. This is something much more of an exchange, of a covenant, right? Of a mutual agreement, of mutual benefit. And that is the important thing to see about social institutions, about culture in general. Culture, societies that have had this kind of miraculous process through social interactions and feedback with one another of channeling human behavior into the very narrow kinds of human behavior that work out good for everyone. The men, the women, the children, the elderly, everyone. And it's quite a miraculous process to behold when you kind of look and you see how it's worked out and you wonder, how the heck did this come about? It's only something that heightens my curiosity the more that gets into it. All right, so when it comes to sex then, what are these natural tendencies of males that perhaps the institution of manhood is trying to move towards productive purposes, right? And especially, what are the negative tendencies of males? Well, if you listen to society today, if you look at, pay attention to stories and media and all these things, the tendencies we tend to focus on would be the aggressive sexual tendencies of men. We have this feeling that men are naturally out of control sexually, right? They're domineering, they're objectifying of women. It's easy to kind of have just a picture of men in their natural state as roving gangs of rapists moving across the land. And will you find this behavior among males? Yes, definitely. We could point to plenty of instances. So it is a tendency of males. This is behavior that you'll find. It has occurred, it does occur, it will occur in the future. It's not good, it's not productive, it's bad, it's wrong, right? But we tend to think that that is the predominant male sexual behavior, right? But the interesting thing is that I don't think that is the predominant male tendency when it comes to the great majority of males. And as my evidence for that, I will show you what the institution of manhood is tend to focus on with regards to sexuality. Because as we've been over in the past, if there's a whole institution of kind of effort and norms trying to direct males into a behavior, that means that they wouldn't naturally do it. Otherwise, why all the work behind the institution, right? And so if you see that kind of work being put into something, it must mean that that behavior is not naturally likely to occur, okay? So what is the natural tendency of males then with regards to sexuality? And I would argue that more often than not, human males are terrified of engaging women sexually. And it takes this work, it takes external forces of cajoling, of incentivizing, of threats even, right, to get many males to engage and act sexually with women. So most males tend to be terrified of women. It seems to be something fairly innate, something fairly natural. And when you think about it, and I'm always bringing him up, but he's so helpful in this regard, but Jordan Peterson's biblical lectures in the Genesis kind of period and the Adam and Eve period are fairly helpful in this. When you get explained, and when you think about the nature of humans, human women especially, it should be no surprise that they would terrify human males when you kind of get out their attributes. And at the core of that is that human women, are choosy, right? If you think of, there's a great line, I think it's Patton Oswalt in the movie, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the movie with Ben Stiller. It has left me, one of those moments where the obvious thing has left you. But in this movie, Patton Oswalt talks about this girl that Ben Stiller's trying to woo, and he says she's a choosy lady. She's a choosy lady. He sings this little song, but that's exactly what women are. They're choosy. And many females, or most females, are choosy when it comes to sex. You look out there at the world of creatures and animals all around there, and there's lots of female species and beings that aren't very choosy. There's quite a bit of flusies out there that will just accept all sorts of sexual advances of the males of their species. But that is not human women. And so a helpful example of that is campus. They've done some studies on campuses, from what I understand. And these studies were that they would take an attractive male, go out onto the campus, and basically proposition women for sex. Say like, hey, would you like to go have sex for me, or something to that effect. And lo and behold, when you take an attractive male who goes out there and propositions women like that, an abysmally small number of those women agree to such a sexual encounter. And then they sent out the attractive female out on the campus to proposition men for sex and offer them an opportunity for a hookup. And an abnormally large success rate, something like 2/3 or 3/4 of the men propositioned were game. Hey, let's go, right? Whereas the number for women was something down in the single digits of those that would accept that thing or that proposition. And so why would that be the case, right? And I think at the heart of it is the fact that it's the reality that most women want their life to improve from entering into a sexual relationship, right? Everybody wants their life to improve from everything they do, right? But with women and men are in a different state when it comes to entering into a sexual relationship, right? The stakes are different. And so it's understandable that we'd have natural kind of instincts towards entering in a sexual relationship that would differ as to men and women. And that's because, children do come from sexual relationships. I know that may be a surprise as we're trained to we've been trained to think that because of the invention of birth control, that's no longer the case. But I hate to break it to you, but babies still result quite regularly from sexual relationships. So it's something we have to keep on thinking about. And the case is that babies do come from sexual relationships. And when they come, the women are forced to be there when they come into the world. And very often the women, naturally are there to nourish and take care of the little child, but not just that. Little children, human children, are quite interesting little creatures, right? They're not like the lambs that we're taking care of right now, that in a couple of months they're weaned off their mother and off they go and they can take care of themselves, right? Humans, they have this 14 to 18 year difficult process of maturation, of going from absolute helplessness to being something capable. John Vervaeke has likened it to, it's like you go to the hospital and you get a sofa, something that just sits there and can do almost nothing. But by the time you're done with them in 18 years, you've got like an F-22 fighter jet, right? But that process of turning that child from one thing to another doesn't just happen naturally, right? We have enormous capacity, but our brains they have to be programmed as it will. And it takes a tremendous amount of physical and social and emotional resources to raise up that child, right? In fact, I have one right here, and her feet are in the cord, and she's about to rip the cord out of my computer, so I'd better help her here. All right, there we go. Here she is, for anyone that wants to see. She's got some nice flowers here. So this is one of those sofas that we brought back. And she's about at a Ford Taurus right now, and we're trying to turn her into an F-22 fighter jet. Thank you, Chase Ellsworth, Walter Mitty. That's the movie. I can't believe I've been trying to think of it this whole time, and it had just left me. So that was an example of what I'm talking about. And yeah, women are obligated to be there when one of those comes into the world, one of those creatures you just saw. And yeah, it takes this long time. So women have this higher stakes. There's something innate that they know that, right? They don't want to enter into just any sexual relationship. They don't want just any male. They want one who will actually help in that process, who will make their lives get better in this. Because it turns out that those little creatures right there, they do make your life better under the right circumstances, right? If you're prepared for them and if you have help. And so it's natural that a female, before she enters into a kind of relationship that might create one of these babies, is that she wants to know that she's going to have the help of someone that's going to be a producer, that can live up to her standard of production, right? Because everybody comes into this world and they kind of expect a state of resources. And some women come into this world at a state of high resources and high class, right? And some come with low, and they want a man that can take them higher, right? So women tend to choose men that can take them from keep them at least at their social state and resources and comfort, or give them even greater. And oftentimes that means, meeting the same level of wealth, but not always. As long as they think that guy's capable, that he has capacity, then those are the kind of guys that they choose, right? But at the basic level, what they don't want is a male that they're going to have to take care of. I mean, that would be the absolute worst, right? Women do like to take care of things. I've noticed this. My daughters, they recently begged and begged my wife and I until we let them get some kittens that were being offered by a local school teacher for free. And they got these 2 little fluffy orange kittens. They came home. They're so cute. They're so helpless. And my daughters have just been doting over them. They put little bows on them and they dress them up in clothes and they take pictures and they stay in their closet and they bring them out to watch movies with them and they pet them and they're so cute. And women love kittens, right? A lot of women, just look at the kitten videos and how many views they get on YouTube, right? But something tells me that they don't want a kitten for a lover, okay? So that's kind of the point that I'm trying to get to. They don't want a man kitten. They want capability, capacity. They want devotion. They want someone who's going to be smitten with them and dazzled with them and taken, with her, such that he is devoted to her for this long, difficult haul that is human life, whether it's talking about human companionship and human development of just, a couple growing into life, or taking, care of this natural outcome of a sexual relationship, which is children. And so, women are choosy. And because they're choosy, that means they don't choose everything. In fact, they have this tendency to reject. They're very good rejectors. That seems to be, again, mostly an innate tendency, instinct of women is to reject, and they're very good at it. So I've worked with a lot of young men. I've supervised these young men in kind of sexual situations, such as a dance, because a dance is a very sexually charged situation. It's the place where sexual unions can happen. I'm not talking about, explicit, sexual consummation or, there at the dance. But that's where we've got to see, I'm going to get into this, that, a sexual union is something as simple as a couple dancing. What are they doing? There's 2 separate things, and they're coming into one. They're forming one thing. The nice thing about a dance is that you can try that out for, 3 minutes, and then you can be done with it and see how it went, right? And so, a dance is a sexually charged situation. I've been there with these young men. And the tendency of young men today at dances, or young males, I could just say, because again, you're trying to make them into men, and they're not, is that they have a tendency today to not at all want to ask a girl to dance. They're timid, they're afraid of it. They're afraid of rejection. And so what do I have to do as somebody that's trying to turn them into men? I have to egg them on. They have to egg each other on, right? You have to make the dance a game. You have to say, all right, guys, before the dance, we're going to go. You don't let there be a single slow dance here where you let a girl, have nobody to dance with because of you. Let's see who can get the most dances tonight, right? And you see instantly, just like with this institution of manhood, you gamify it. You make it a task, something to be won, and automatically, boom, you turn guys on, and away they go, right? And they go, and somebody has the first courage to ask the girl to dance. As soon as one does it, more does it, and they come to you, and what do you tell them, right? You say, "You the man," right? That's how it goes. That's how it should go. But sadly, more and more, that is not how it's going. I even have a personal story with this regard. Something that still stings me, and that was kind of my first, genuine kind of romantic relationship. And sad to say that, and I'm going to call this girl with whom the relationship was, I'm going to call her Gwendolyn, to protect her privacy. But anyway, I'm sad to say this was maybe when I was 15 years old. And Gwendolyn definitely sought me out more than I sought out Gwendolyn. And so I'd heard from her friends that she has her eye on you. And at a dance, she asked me, and, so that's good. It gives you at least some confidence, because if girls are choosy and they choose you, well, hey, that's good. And Gwendolyn danced very close, right? And that was obvious to me, and very different from any other dances that I'd been to. And I didn't tend to go to dances. I was a pretty shy guy up to this point, and very much in need of the kind of things that I'm talking about today. So anyway, she did that, and eventually we did go to a movie together. In my culture, we weren't supposed to date officially till we were 16, and so this was with her sister, there, so we kind of called it a group experience, but it was something more akin to a date. And anyway, in that course of the movie, it's very natural that you look down and you see, oh, hey, my hand's kind of down there, and her hand's kind of down there. I wonder if she wants to hold hands, right? And thus begins the maybe half an hour to 40-minute process. This was during Titanic, so I had the time, right, to slowly move the hand right there, ever closer, just hoping that somehow you could bridge that great chasm between you. And it was, it was definitely pitiful, right? And over this course, yes, I edged it ever so closer. But here's my shame, right? That when push comes to shove, clearly it's there, her hand's there. If I would have known better what I know now, I would have known that she's just begging for me to hold her hand, right? And the shame to me is that, Gwendolyn actually bridged the gap. She was the one that made the last move to join our hands together, right? And I will chalk that up very openly as one of the most sexual experiences of my life. One of the first most kind of potent sexual experiences. Why? Because look at hands. What are you doing? You're intertwining your two things. Now you're becoming one, right? And it was triumphant and it was great, except for, now that I've wised up, it stings still. I still remember it as an important moment in my life because she had to make the move. So, and in the end, that's kind of how our relationship went, and that's going to be very important for what we get into today. In the end, we reached a point where I wanted to kiss her, right? That was kind of the next step eventually down the road. But for some reason, and not for some reason, very naturally now, I was in the habit of thinking, oh, it was just going to happen, right? And it never did happen. And I kind of tried to send signals and this, that. But what ultimately ended our relationship was that I think she realized I didn't have it, I didn't have the gumption. I didn't have, dare I say it, the balls to actually do that. So the relationship ended. I grew up a little bit from that and learned and was more successful at actually being the moving factor in later relationships and kind of wising up, I guess you can say, in this regard. But I make that because it will illustrate everything that we're going to talk about today and why, as we look at cultures, because this is going to move into this cultural context where whole tribes, whole cultures have had to deal with this exact factor and show you that this is the natural tendency of men to be scared, to be non-actors when it comes to sexuality. Jordan Peterson says, we have twice as many female relatives as male. And I've thought a lot about that. I've never seen that verified, so don't chalk that up as some scientific fact or something, but he claims that he usually has pretty good support for what he says. But if you think about what that means, that's a crazy statistic. That means that I think some of that has to do with the fact that males over history have been expendable. A lot more are dying. They're dying in wars, they're dying fighting and hunting and these and that, so there's just less of them around eventually. But a lot of it means that a lot of it has to come from the fact that many men are rejected and never reproduce sexually, so they don't become a relative of anybody, whereas double the amount of women do, and hence why they're in that as relatives. And if that's actually that is a sobering statistic. So it should be no surprise now that the main thrust of the institution of manhood in societies has not been to, counter this aggressive tendency to men. It's actually been to get men to act more assertively when it comes to sex, to woo and win women's hearts, right? To overcome their choosy nature and to engage successfully in sex with them. That's the starting point. But that is not enough for societies. They want children in the end. So that's why this talk is entitled, From Lover to Father. They want, if you don't get the father, well, it wasn't for much, basically, is what societies will say. The end point is babies, and that may surprise some of us today, but it turns out that most societies have seen babies as treasures, as the most prized and desired thing. And you could be cynical and say, yeah, that's just because they needed more help on the farm. Like, I just heard that this week, from somebody. And you're like, really? Is that, again, we do this to our ancestors. We tend to denigrate them and dishonor them in that way, that they were so simplistic. They just operated on make-believe stories and out of cynical needs like that. Could it be maybe that they also loved their cultures? They wanted them to perpetuate, right? Could it be also that they saw innate value in human life? And they looked around in the universe and they said, we don't see anything yet as complex or as impressive as a human being, as a human mind, as the human logos. And that's an intrinsic good to produce humans. So it's good to have children, right? Just maybe they thought that, huh? But undoubtedly they did value babies. And so manhood was about wooing women, having sex, mutually satisfying sex, by the way. The satisfaction of men and women in this process. And that is important to know, with the cynical nature that we look back and say, women have always been in every situation mistreated and dominated and given the worst treatment. Well, we're going to see if we can prove that wrong today. And there was definitely the coupling of these sexual expectations on men in manhood with the providing role, the big man role that we went over last time. All right, so you kind of have to see these two together, this episode with the last episode. There is definitely a conjoining of manhood pushing men to be lovers and procreators, but then couple that with providers, to see it through, right? To provide abundant resources to the children that are eventually produced until they are grown and they can do so themselves. So let's get into the examples. We'll start with the Amhara people in Ethiopia. And not all of these, I'm going to say, would work today, these examples and these traditions that they had, and a lot of them will seem crude, and some of them are denigrating to women. So I'm not saying everything was perfect in the past, but you'll see, my main point today is what manhood was trying to push males into, because that is the main point I want to make today. So with the Amhara in Ethiopia, there would be a public display of the potency, not just of a man on the battlefield, but in the marriage bed. So on his wedding night, he needs to come out and wave a bloody sheet out to the public to prove that marital consummation has happened on that wedding night. As we brought up time and time again, manhood is a public affair, and this needed to be public proof that something had happened that society wanted. They want that marriage. Marriage is bound up with sex when it's seen in a societal way. And that's for a whole other episode where we're totally baffled by marriage and what it is today because of what it's become. But at least back here, when it was a social institution, there needed to be some public proof that something had happened that society wanted, and that was the consummation of the marriage, the successful sexual union. And so you wave this bloody sheet showing that it happened. Crude, yes, all right, but I'm just trying to prove the point of what this was to people, what manhood was about. In urban Mexico, there's very much a macho culture where it's expected that men must perform adequately in sex and father many children. Okay? In Eastern Morocco, the book where I'm getting many of these examples from that I've shown a number of times, Manhood in the Making, says that true men are distinguished from effete men on the basis of physical prowess and heroic acts of both feuding and sexual potency. Their heroic acts are memorialized in verses sung before admiring crowds at festivals, making manhood a kind of communal celebration. So men who are sexually potent, they're sung about out there in the public. Again, they're doing things that society wants, and we're going to sing about it. We're going to praise them. We're going to give them praise and status for having done this thing, which men otherwise wouldn't do. We go to the Mediterranean area where you're talking about Spain and Italy and areas such as that, Greece, and you do see some, embarrassing behaviors. There is traditions of prenuptial rape and bride theft, where men are cajoled to do such things. And so that's negative, that's wrong, that's things we would no longer accept in our society and shouldn't. Especially, again, I bring this up a lot, but that we don't accept it anymore because Christianity changed the world, folks, in these kinds of regards, and said that that's no longer acceptable. So we've got to give that its due for why that happens today, where our notions of respect for human beings, all human beings, came from. So you've got to put that in. But what is maybe more positive that you'd see in these Mediterranean areas is an assertiveness, an expectation of assertiveness in courtship. Focus not just on being sexually potent or promiscuous, because sometimes there is these kind of cultures that kind of praise men for being promiscuous, at least getting started in that sexual journey, right? But almost inevitably, this is just seen as a training ground. What really matters in the end is children. That's the ultimate end, because children are a treasure. And so there's all sorts of talk of men that can see it through to the end and produce children. They've got big balls, they've got big testicles, right? And I laugh about this because now we're into agriculture, and it's funny, when we went out to pick up a billy goat from a goat farm in Wyoming a few months ago. So I get out there and I'm asking the goat herder there, a lady who's quite successful, has hundreds of goats there. I'm like, can you kind of walk me through what to look for in a goat? And she kind of chuckles and she said, well, the main thing you want to look for is that he's got some big balls, that she's got some big testicles there. And so, we're out there just admiring how big the testicles are of each goat, because just naturally in our minds, and it's not even proven, by the way, I don't think that bigger testicles in a goat amounts to them being better goat sires and producing better children. But that is the notion that's in our brain, that big balls, big testicles means a more potent man, a man who produces children, who is a real man, right? And if you can't get the job done, if you can't get to that point, then in Andalusia in Spain, then they're talking about your manhood, right? They're saying, no sirve para nada, right? It's not good for anything, okay? So your genitalia, your manhood region, not good for anything. It's flojo is the other word that they have, which translates very nicely into flaccid or limp, right? Impotent. And so there's those notions there in Mediterranean, but again, they see it all the way through that you should produce children, but then it paired it to the big man role. You need to provide abundant resources for that. And let's not kid around. All this is incredibly difficult, right? We have gone through how the rites of passage of manhood are all about enduring pain and difficulty and doing these difficult things. Well, this stuff is no less difficult in its own way, but that is manhood, folks, and that's why it's only offered to those that can live up to it. Okay, let's move to an island culture, the Truk Island in Micronesia. And I'm going to read straight from the book on this because these passages are priceless. They're actually quite entertaining. So bear with me as we go through some longer passages, but I think it's worth it. Okay, so Truk Island is part of Micronesia in the Pacific. It says, fighting, drinking, and defying the sea are not the only measures of manhood. A Truckese man must prove competence in another arena, sex. This sexual element reminds Marshall of masculine honor in some Mediterranean countries. Out of a need to prove themselves strong masculine figures, Truckese males strive to conquer women sexually to show assertiveness. The personal reputation carried by every Truckese male is not unlike the concept of honor or face found in countries where machismo is a dominant masculine value. To maintain face in the sexual act, a Truckese man must be the initiator, totally in command. The success of the sexual act depends entirely upon his performance. In every love affair, he is sorely tested. Like the Andalusians and the Italians, a Truckee man must be potent, having many lovers, bringing his partners to orgasm time and again. And again, is this pro-women or anti-women? I leave it to you to make that judgment. Interestingly, this erotic ability is again phrased in an idiom, not of love or charm, but of pure physical competence. If he fails to satisfy her, the woman laughs at him. He is shamed for being ineffectual. Ward Goodenow, a professor of Marshall's on Truck, has written this: intercourse is often likened to a contest in which the partner who first achieves an orgasm is said to lose to the other. Maybe I should try that. Or perhaps I already have. Just kidding. The men say that a woman may laugh at a man if he fails to satisfy her. And significantly, his failure to perform is rewarded by jibes and insults that liken him to a baby because he is incapable of performance. Again, look at this, how you can't perform, and what is the thing that you reduce to time and time again in these cultures? A baby, right? A boy. The standard insult for a man who performs badly is the advice to take the breast like a baby. Like fighting and breadwinning, sexual intercourse is thus also a risky business for Truckee men, a question of winning or losing, for the man can either do the job or not, depending on how his organ works. Moreover, in Thomas Gladwin's phrase, intercourse is a contest in which it is only the man who can lose and not the woman. So the men must perform as best they can, but as we have seen before, simple stamina is not all that matters when it comes to the sexual side of masculine efficiency. Sexual competence must lead to marriage, procreation, and ultimately the expansion of the primary group. Fathering many children, whether in or out of wedlock, is a critical sign of manly strength for Truckee men. Along these same lines, a man traditionally could demonstrate his personal power by possessing and impregnating more than one wife, although Christian teachings have now put an end to polygyny on Truck. Having more than one wife showed that a man was of such unusual capacity that he could take on several burdensome social relationships at the same time, or better, that he was able to turn what was customarily a subordinate relationship, because in Truck they have a matrilineal society where families are carried kind of through the woman's line, to another lineage into an equal or dominant one. All right. Again, I think these passages are classic, but let's turn to the Mehinaku in the Amazon in Brazil. Aside from forceful action, as in the above incident, egged on significantly by allegations of effeminacy, probably most important to the Mehinaku as a measure of maleness is sexual performance. The Mehinaku, as Gregor describes them, are unusually preoccupied by sex, the men complaining that they can never get enough of it and talking about it all the time. Sexual exploits and joking are constant items of male banter. Responding to all this public highlighting of sexuality, a Mehinaku man wants to show himself an adequate lover so he can claim normalcy. Sexual function, in the ethnographer's words, is passport to acceptance generally as a man, and indeed a critical part of the Mehinaku masculinity syndrome that defines adult male status. Like the Truckees, a man who fails to bring his wife or lover to orgasm, fails to satisfy his partner, fails to beget children, is ridiculed and publicly shamed, becoming not just a figure of fun, but an outcast in a more inclusive sense. Everyone learns quickly of his disgrace. A man's sexual failures are common knowledge, and his reputation as a lover rides precariously on the shifting currents of community gossip. And let's pause for just a moment on that notion of this ridiculing. Again, because of our Christian notions, there's something in us that should say, man, you feel bad for the person that doesn't measure up. What do we do about that person? And so there is something that we should today feel that there's got to be a better solution to that. On the other hand, we have made it so that any sort of this kind of teasing and ridicule and cajoling is also kind of off limits today. And I think we lose that, or have lost some of that to the peril, you could say, of our society. Because there is something about males and manhood, that this kind of teasing is a good thing in its rightful measure, right? Can it be taken too far? Of course, but we should at least recognize that it's a potent force and it can be for good. So why not focus on keeping it at that level of good, but still keeping it around, right? Okay, going on, sexual vigor is critical but insufficient to prove manhood. Also important to a man's image is worldly achievement. So I read this to just kind of tie in that thing that this in these cultures, it's not just sexual vigor, but it's this tie to being the big man and the provider. One cannot go with the other. And so it talks about here how there's this direct correlation between material and erotic achievement, both in which lead to a coveted manly reputation. And it talks about how the women are looking for the men that are the big men. Those are the ones that are most sexually attractive to these Menaku women. This kind of sex for lucre exchange is rampant because Menaku men believe that women are by nature less interested in sex than they are and have to be seduced or lured into it. In reality, this may not be true, but the women's seeming coyness is also attributed to a moral double standard that constrains them in sexual matters more than men. All men, says one typical Menaku man, Ketepe, like sex. But women are different. Women are stingy with their vaginas, he concludes, to general male agreement. Nevertheless, women are easily seduced by offers of meat, fruit, and Western consumer goods, all of which are in short supply in the subsistence economy. In sum, a poor man or a bad worker who cannot produce can make few sexual conquests in the face of female indifference or resistance, so he forfeits a spotless masculine image, thus being consigned to a low position in the prestige hierarchy. The rich man has many wives and lovers, and thus much prestige. The poor man has few. Characteristically, this reminds Gregor of nothing so much as modern American society. As in our own society, men who are socially successful are more attractive to women as sexual partners. Again, this may or may not be true in an objective sense, but it is certainly a widespread impression among both the general public and sociologists who have studied the issue. Okay, I had one more passage in New Guinea that basically said the same thing, so I'm just going to have, but in interest of time, I'm going to skip that one, but that was in New Guinea culture where the whole phrasing of big man comes from. So you have the exact same things. Big men are expected to produce resources and reproduction of resources, but they're also expected to reproduce and procreate as well. It's tied into the same thing. And in there, New Guinea, you find several of these tribes there in New Guinea who have kind of the culmination of their rite of passage into manhood being their first child. And some, it's even the fourth child, On the fourth child, then you've really become a man. So looking at all these examples, you see this common pattern. Again, this is near universal pattern with differences. Of course, every society is different, but you see that the notion of manhood across time and cultures has mainly had to do with getting men to be aggressive in courtship, right? To lead out, to be assertive, not physically aggressive, not domineeringly aggressive. That has existed sometimes, but that's not the common factor, right? It is assertiveness to seduce and to win a wife. And of course, we listen to that and we say, you can hear the feminists saying, win a wife, a wife, some sort of trophy and an object to win. And you say, okay. How about win a woman's heart, right? Can we at least agree on that it would be good for a man to assertively win a woman's heart, right? And that is what we see. So, and the other thing to just kind of consider is how this currency works for men. If we say that sexuality and as it's tied into manhood is this exchange for men, what is it that men get for falling into this, for being assertive? Well, of course, they get sex itself, and that's a pretty good reward, right? Well, what do you get for, as it says, bringing your partner to orgasm again and again, right? Well, also, I don't know, maybe, obviously some of you might not have experienced that if you're a younger viewer or something like that, but that is also a fulfilling thing for a man to know that he can do that. That's what men are afraid of, in this, is they don't know that they can't. So there's an innate reward in knowing that you can do that as a man, of satisfying your feminine partner, right? But beyond that, what do you get? Like, for example, what's the currency that we use within this context of manhood to, once the man's done the deed, he's wooed the woman, he's won her heart, they've consummated sexually, and she's been impregnated, how do we then, 9 months later, get that man to be there? Because there's less of an innate reward, isn't there? I mean, there's a reward for seeing your child born, don't get me wrong. But a lot of men might not realize it ahead of time. And so 9 months later, they may be well gone if it weren't for something like the institution of manhood. What's the currency that gets them there? And if you haven't noticed from these examples, the currency is status and honor. Something that I care about. I don't know if you as a male care about that, but I do, and I think most males do. And so that pat on the back, that recognition, that the end of, It's a Wonderful Life, where everybody comes and says, thank you, George Bailey. Let's sing you this song and say you're a great guy. That is the currency that gets them to be here. And it's quite sobering that it's so simple, to get men to do this kind of stuff. Last thing that I wanted to bring up is just kind of a potent example of all this, and one that's not exactly an example of a good man, but kind of, in my mind, who is one of the epitomes, kind of the archetypal figures in this vein of potent sexuality, is Genghis Khan. Not a good man, right, in the moral sense. We only hear of conquest and killing and rape and pillage and all that stuff. But then you learn these DNA studies that have come out in the last few years, where by some estimates, they think in whole huge regions of Asia, they think that a quarter of the population might be related to Genghis Khan. And even listening to the newscasts and stuff that, tend to, lean to maybe the more assumption of toxic masculinity and stuff, you can't help but hear a little bit of respect in people's voice to learn that one figure was able to be so sexually potent that a quarter of the population today now comes from him. Again, it's not a good example. He's not a good man, but it is an example of somebody because manhood is not about being a good man in most societies. It's about being a producing man that does good things for society. And in as much as babies and identity is good for society, well then, a man that can do that is seen as good in the context of manhood. One other thing I want to bring up is how in all these cultures, and I think I skipped a passage that was going to bring this out, but almost all these cultures also have an accompanying preoccupation with like magical and food item tie-ins to male fertility, to try to produce sexual potency magically, to prepare a man to be potent and virile. And if you have been around the world and kind of been to markets and things like that, you will often find still to this day, Anthony Bourdain is the best example, because in his show, people were always offering him foods and things like that. They were like, oh, by the way, this is supposed to make you, sexually potent. And he would always make his comment of, if I had, essentially if I had a dime for every time somebody in some of these countries was telling me that something was going to make me sexually potent, right? Well, anyway, what to make of that? What to make of that is, again, this preoccupation amongst men across these cultures that they're not going to measure up. And that, again, is my central point in this whole video. I am going to right now take a look. We've gotten quite a number of comments here, so I'm going to take a look, make sure that I'm not forgetting to address anything that some of you that are here live watching this want me to talk about, or comments or questions that you're making. So everybody can kind of take a break. I know these things kind of start going on, and all of us can use kind of a little break in the process. All right, so thanks to Chase again for the movie. Reference, Noah S., I didn't get the point of dancing. Yeah, it's so simple. It's so obvious once you think of it, but it can be mysterious up until that point. But you realize, dancing, that's what it's for. You get to try out being one with somebody and see, do we make something better, or are we awkward and clumsy and really just don't fit well together, right? And it's cool that that's the process. And you see, there's all sorts of those sexual union, temporary sexual union steps that can be taken into a path of consummation. Holding hands, hugging, it's all the same thing. It's communion. It's becoming one thing. And that is what sexuality is, after all. And I'll make a comment on that in just a second. Christian asks, does that mean you can have sexual union with someone who isn't your spouse by dancing with them? And I would say yes. I mean, you can create that kind of sexual feeling with anyone. I mean, luckily, again, it's temporary. It's not real, but yeah, it's going to be sexual no matter how much you look at it. It goes into the type of love of eros love, right? So there's 3 general types of love that the Greeks brought out. There's agape, which is godly love, or the love of a parent for a child wanting to see things grow. There is philia, brotherly love, the love of friendship and exchange. And then there's eros, the love of becoming one with something. And that can be romantically and erotically charged, sexually charged, but that can be, if you think of a communion in the Christian sense, the communion with God, the communion of a body of Christians one to another. You can see how that's a communion of several things becoming one thing. And so, of course, if you dance with your mother at a dance, it's probably not going to be too sexually charged or something like that. Hopefully not, with, all the Oedipal stuff that, psychologists love to talk about and things like that. But, for the most part, I don't think that's happening when most people dance with their moms that dance. So it's not like it's innately sexually charged if you do, but definitely, just because you get married to somebody doesn't mean that sexual potency and attraction ends towards others. I mean, it certainly hasn't for me, and that's just part of what marriage is. Your commitment to not act on those kinds of attractions, even though, you could, and for reasons we'll get into on a series to do with what marriage is. But anyway, hopefully that answers that question. Yeah, Noah S. talks about birds dancing to attract partners. And yeah, those are super interesting to see the male thing. It's also interesting to see that in certain cultures, in human cultures too, not just with birds, men will be the ones that dress themselves up in ornate things to impress a woman, whereas kind of right now we have the opposite of that. And so that's not a fixed thing. It's not just women that decorate and adorn themselves to attract the other. Sometimes it's the men who do that. And you can kind of look back into history and see that maybe kind of the French, king or something with the wig and the fineries and the silks and all that. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess it can go both ways, huh? All right, I'm glad that you guys are talking with each other on here. Martin, when I bring up my story of Gwendolyn, of that encounter with Gwendolyn, he says, haven't had another relationship? How did you move on? So yeah, when Martin said, how did I move on from that? Well, luckily, yeah, I was able to. And see, in high school, it was a lot easier. I mean, I was 15 years old, and so there was just more opportunities. And like I said, that thing, it increased my confidence in the fact that maybe some girls were interested in me. Because again, my natural tendency was to think like, no, I'll be rejected. They're not. So if anything, that relationship just said, women, as much as I said that they're choosy, when you look at it, especially today, where their pool of men is so abysmal, it's not that much you have to do to be attracted to a man today. It's like, have a decent providing job, not be a complete slob, but kind of keep yourself relatively presentable, right? And then have some capacity that shows that over the long course of things, you can be a fairly dependable, capable person, and you'll find plenty of fantastic women that you could, unify with, I guess you could say, especially today. Noah brings up that today it's hard to find somebody that might think this way. So we're going to get into that. That's the part of the last presentation. I'm glad you brought that up, about what to think about the fact that a lot of, a feminist might listen to what I've presented thus far, and her instinct would be, this smacks of bad things, of toxic masculinity, and things like that. So we'll address that. And Christian says, thank goodness men do care about honor. Imagine if there was no driver like that. It is really probably dangerous to erode this idea of honor and prestige. Yes, certainly. Because it is the currency by which you can get men to do incredible things, incredible, dangerous, difficult, painful deeds. And so, if you take it away, well, you might just get the society that you deserve, right? All right. So this one I'm going to move on. But the first thing I wanted to say about this notion of sexuality as a union is just to recognize why another reason that societies have been so preoccupied with making sure that this happens. Because if you can understand sexuality, human sexuality, as a union, of bringing two disparate things into one thing, then you see that societies would want the new thing, the thing together, to be something better than those two people by themselves. And unfortunately, the way people can combine, they don't always make something better. They can create problems, right? So just like as with males and the problems that they can get themselves into, society has big stakes in trying to get people to make a union sexually that results in better things for society. Because children especially can come from those unions, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Most societies want to see it as a good thing, but if it means that society has to put in all this stuff to take care of that child in ways that otherwise, two people could have been taking care of them, the biological parents of that child, then that's not a good thing for society. That's a problem, right? Which is why, again, you see marriage being brought into this, and society saying, look, we'll give you status and honor of a married couple in our society, but you've got to play by some rules with this sexual relationship. You've got to bind yourself within this in a way that we can be more confident that you guys joining together will be something that we actually like, that ends up better for us, that we don't have to end up cleaning up the mess from. And if you do so, we'll throw a party for you, we'll come to your reception, we'll give you money, we'll give you gifts, and we'll help you out along the way, right? And I already just kind of laid out what marriage used to be and why it makes sense as a social thing. It's not about love and romance. That's why marriage so oftentimes in the past had nothing to do with love, right? It was arranged. Why was it arranged? Because society wanted to make sure that this would end up being beneficial to society. And if you didn't play by those rules, okay, well, fine, but don't expect society to celebrate you. Don't expect us to come to your marriage or give you presents or things like that. I mean, that's the way it worked. You're celebrated and given status and money and support from this culture if you played by some rules that society thought would be helpful to society. And if you don't want to play by those, fine. But we're also probably going to, it's the opposite that happens, right? It's just like manhood. If you don't play by the rules, boom, be gone. We don't want to deal with you. We don't like you. And yeah, that's harsh, and it was overly harsh, and that's why we look back and don't like certain attributes of how unmarried people or adulterers were treated or things like that. But that's what society was up against, wanting things to go well. And then what's marriage become today? It's turned into something that's all about the love of two people. And it's like, hey, that's fine and good. That's great that two people love each other, but why should I care, if my neighbors who love each other are getting married? Why should I show up? Why should I give them money? Why should I give them presents? It was the same the day before they got married from the day after. There's no difference there. And And everybody realizes it, which is why, lo and behold, less people get married. Because they say, what's it about if it's all just about two people loving each other? That's not much. Why should we go through all the hubbub of all this if it's just that? So there's my little 5-minute summary of what happened to marriage we can get bigger into later. But where I was going with this is that, yeah, sexuality or sex is a union, and it bridges the primary divide of reality, right? The masculine and the feminine coming together. Because our society has convinced us that there's these other divides that are even more important, right? The primary divide is between white people and colored people. The primary divide is between LGBT people and straight people, you know. Those are the great divides. Well, they haven't always been the great divides. The primary divide always has been men and women, you know, masculine and feminine. So a society has tremendous incentive to try to make that divide get bridged and for the masculine and feminine to come together in ways that we've been talking about in these other videos, in ways that come together and form something better. And so much work has to get put into making that happen. It doesn't just automatically happen always. And that's the essence of manhood and the essence of marriage. All right, so let's move on to that, from that. And let's talk about now about the male tendency to regress into an infant-mother relationship and how this now comes to deal with these notions of toxic masculinity and male assertiveness. So today, it started like when I was in high school, you started to get these notions of women, I don't want the door open for me. I don't want chivalry. I don't want a man to always be the one that asks on a date. I want to pay for some of these dates and things like that. Because I think the notion was, and I don't blame them for this because these notions do there, the notion was that women couldn't do this, you know, that women are helpless, that women can't pay for things, that women can't make money, right? And so the women's movement and feminist movement says, you know, I don't like this stuff that treats us as if we can't do these things, as if we're helpless. So we want to abolish these things, this chivalry notion, and, you know, you don't need to open the door for me, and you don't need to do that. I'm going to pay for the dates, and I want to ask sometimes, and let's make this equal, right? And say, okay, fair enough. Everybody's free to do that. You know, I'm one of the most libertarian people that I know. Say, make those choices. Do that. Women can be assertive. Women can ask men out on dates. You know, women can pay equally for the date. You can open your own doors. Okay, you've convinced us, right? And I apologize to women on behalf of any male notions out there that were ever suggested that you couldn't do these things. You weren't capable. Because actually, I don't think that's what it was really about, is the point I want to make. Instead, those notions were there, that whole chivalry thing, that whole thing, it was there for what we've been talking about today because it was about training the man to get into a helpful role rather than a dependent one. And that's where I would ask women, you know, do you really want a world where you don't insist on men doing this? Because if you don't want men to do these kinds of things, to be productive, to help out where they can, where they have the capability to help out, things like that, guess what? They probably won't. They have a talent. Men have a talent, an innate talent for letting other people do stuff like this and for getting taken care of. And once again, I think this has to do with the fact that males very easily, for different psychological reasons, have a talent for regressing back into a mother-child relationship. There was something very easy and secure about that, right? Where somebody else was taking care of you, nourishing you, and things like that. So that's the kind of relationship they had with their mother, and I think too many males, if they're given the open door into that, will naturally slide into that, and a woman who wants a lover, and this equal, lover, and she's doing all these, things of paying and showing how much she can take care of things, will quickly find that she's got a boy to take care of, right? Getting back to that kitten, if as a woman you want a kitten, you can probably get a kitten man if that's what you really want. But I don't think that's what most women actually want most of the time. And if you stop listening to kind of the women's movement, you could say, and instead look at what they do. Again, look at the literature. Don't listen to me. You go search this stuff for yourself. But you look at your internet searches, women's internet searches. You pay attention to what they in themselves indicate their sexual fantasies are. And you don't find many women wanting kitten men as partners, sexual partners, lifelong partners. What do you see women searching for, turned on by, you could say? And it comes out, billionaire, doctor, pirate, soldier, cowboy, vampire, werewolf, right? And sometimes, I'm sure women want a nice, tender, understanding, emotional guy because women's moods, as at least my experience has been, tend to ebb and flow like the ocean currents, and that's very normal. But again, if you look at what they consume, if you look at Stephanie Meyer novels and 50 Shades of Grey and things like that, and the millions of women who are eating this stuff up, sometimes it would seem, women want a man who could seduce them, who have that potency, a man who could ravish them. Not rape, ravish, right? And I would claim there is a difference. There is a crucial difference, right? I'm not advocating rape by any means. So, those are the kinds of things, the kind of impossible situation sometimes that this whole women's movement, toxic masculinity kind of mood places men into today. That on the one hand, women give all these indicators of this, what they want, but on the other hand, they say, no, I don't want that. And as we've been studying femininity and the feminine, that fits very well. It doesn't, the feminine is not a space of non-contradiction, right? And I recognize that. I honor that because you want those spaces of non-contradiction, right? But at the end of the day, I think most women probably, again, I don't want to speak for women, so women speak for yourselves, but my observation of the women that I've noticed in my life, okay, so my simple observation is that most women want this capacity, this virility, this ability to act in men. And so if you want that, then maybe it's worth letting men do things like be the moving factor in a romantic relationship, pay for dates, do things like open doors, the things that he can do. And if it's not that you want to do, okay, fine. You negotiate it out with the thing. But if you see the signs of a man, regressing into sort of, kitten man relationship, then I would say you might want to look out for that and not come out with your own way then of trying to get him not to regress into that. And I bring this up because this has happened just in my life in this week. We have tried to associate with some of the youth around here because, of course, our children are young. And so there's a particular girl around here. I'm going to call her Sally, again, because I'm just making up a name to protect her privacy and whatnot. We get talking to Sally. She is a great gal, cute, capable, all the things that she needs. And she's telling us how she, at dances, has to ask all the guys to dance because otherwise they won't. So she's going to do it, and otherwise they won't. And so I'm sympathetic to that because, again, we're in this state today where boys have not been inculcated into a culture of manhood where they're getting cajoled to make sure that they do ask to dance. So what are women to do but say, well, I'm going to have to do it then. But instead with Sally, instead of saying, no, that's a good thing, that's your only option left, that's what you should do, what we tried to suggest to her, at least my wife did, because my wife was the one giving the advice, Sarah, and she was saying, well, why don't you, there's ways of getting a guy to ask you to dance that aren't to do with you asking that guy to dance, right? And she gave her the simple thing of, go try this, go to a dance, make direct eye contact, and kind of look away maybe 2 or 3 times with the guy at that dance and see if if he doesn't ask you to dance, right? Because what did you do in that, in this broader context? You said, hey, guess what? If you approach me and you know, kind of you could say proposition me sexually, because a dance is a sexual thing, I'm probably not going to reject you, right? And just that little help is sometimes all a guy needs, right? And so, yeah, there's an example. Another one is that my son just got asked out on a date, okay, by somebody who he was actually planning on asking out on a date. I mean, Thomas is, of course, we talk about this stuff. He knows what's kind of expected of him, and he was on the course to acting, but guess what? He didn't act yet. You know, he could have acted, he didn't, and eventually this girl asked him out on a date. And again, I don't blame her. This isn't about her and her problem, but you know, we did have to have a talk with Thomas of like, yeah, you know, that's the thing. You miss this opportunity, and women are going to move, but in the end, I don't think that's the right solution, that women start making these moves, because when you take society as a whole, I just don't think it leads to good things. You know, the last thing society needs is kitten men, non-producing males, non-assertive males, because that means that other people have to take care of them. And society, I don't think society ever wants these kitten men. We lower amounts of sex today in the world. Male sperm counts are lowering today. And they think it may have something to do with chemicals and I think endocrine disruptors, and you see these things thrown around, but knowing how complex humans are, like, it wouldn't surprise me in the least that some of it has to do with the fact that, you know, the male organs, the male energy, the manhood of a man is just not being called out as useful as much today. So why should, you know, the body's excess resources be devoted to it? It can be allowed to go limp, dormant, flojo, as they say in Spain, flaccid. Is that what we really want from the male energy today? You know, I'll let you guys answer that. I know what I would rather prefer from males, from the boys in my life, the boys that are trying to become men in my family, those around me, is that instead what you want from males is indefinite increase in posterity and in resources, right? And that's all what we've been talking about here, turning these males into these producers of fruit, of seed, of resources, of food and shelter, and all these things that benefit other people. This thought, in being this lover that leads to a procreator, we oftentimes concentrate on the sex act, you know, the male sex act and kind of the male orgasm and things, and say, well, that's not very impressive. You know, on TikTok the other day, or Instagram Reels, because I check these things out just to see what's going on in society. You know, there was this TikTok reel the other day of a woman who's pregnant, kind of giving this little TikTok segment about how, you know, how pathetic it was of what she's had to do with producing this child and all that, you know, the male had to do, and it's pathetic. And, you know, Jim Gaffigan has jokes about this, and we laugh because we know it's true and things like that. But the thing we have to, and again, I'm sorry my nose is running, it's kind of cold here, and I get this dripping nose, so I apologize about that. Welcome to live streaming. But anyway, we make these jokes about that, and we all laugh, haha, because we know it's true. But the thing is, we don't give it its fair due, because yes, that act is inherently selfish and fulfilling for the man in that moment. But if you only focus on that moment, you lose the bigger picture. And what's the bigger picture? Is that there is tremendous difficulty on the male's part and danger and whatnot prior to that moment, and even getting to that moment. And then there's tremendous difficulty that again, a guy is not naturally obligated to do in sticking around and being there for the 14 to 18 years that follow, right? And so we need to get back that bigger picture of what males contribute to this. And instead of this constant denigration and buffooning of men, and this decades-long thing of the dumb dad and the incapable, bumbling guy. We need to get back to encouraging males, right? When they take these steps. We need to get up, setting contests for them, encouraging the guys at the dance to see who can be the most assertive out there. We need to get some cajoling and teasing, because a certain amount of that is good for males. And you'll see, males will do this naturally with each other, but instead of having a gang cajole and tease and promote something, that's more domineering, kind of sexual culture and rape and stuff like that, that's where the more mature people need to come in and cajole and tease and set up these competitions in a more productive way. And that is what manhood has been about, right? But the worst thing we can do is to give him the out and say, you don't even need to do it at all. You can just wait, and women will do it. They'll be assertive. They'll bring you into this. People are free to do that. Again, like I said, I'm not for forcing anybody to do anything. But if we go down that path, if women go down that path, we continue down that path, we may just end up with a kitten, sleeping on the couch all day, right? And I think finally that is all I have to say about that today. So I want to see what you guys have to say about this stuff. And so I'm going to go back, look at what you have written since the last point we had, and then we'll wrap this up. Yeah, Christian Nimmo. A soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. And Christian, by the way, I got your email yesterday, thought it was fantastic, and I'll be replying to you. I am sometimes slow to reply on email. All right, Martin, it was Karl Marx who said women should work. Again, think how what we were saying yesterday, communism, and Marxism, the things that lead to that is all about this equalization. It falls more into that feminine category of looking at the world, where everything gets equalized. If everything gets equalized, then women should do the same things. And again, to be clear, I am not about women not being capable or not being able to work. And if women want to work, great, work. I'm all for a society that allows those possibilities, because human life is complex, and I want people to be able to do what does produce the most meaning and fulfillment for them, right? But my big thing is that today we've almost obligated women to work. We're pressuring them to work in certain kinds of work, money-making work. Well, my thing is, if they're free to not be obligated to do that, I would like to see women have a greater space of possibility today and be honored for the full range of things that they have to contribute. So I just want to be clear on that with all this, just because, I don't know who in the future will be watching this stuff and what they could accuse me of with outdated notions. But I want my whole purpose in this is to show that past notions had reasons and goodness to them, and they can be brought into our modern notions. There's ways of, I'm an and person, of having the best of the past and the best of the future. So that wasn't exactly what Martin was talking about, but it just spurred that thought. All right, One Outstrider. Hey, that's a new name, and I'm always glad to see new people participating. I like to listen to your talks and perspectives. I find a lot of value in them. However, as much as we can work at being a better man, I think there's not nearly enough talks pointing towards modern... For some reason, I can't see the rest of that. Did I have to... Here, just a sec, I think... For some reason, I can't see the rest of that comment, and so I apologize, One Outsider. Okay, there it is, female behavior. Okay, I think there's not nearly enough talks pointing towards modern female behavior such as promiscuity, liberation on all levels that costs well-being of entire cultures, nations. Yeah, and that's a whole nother topic. I mean, the world has fundamentally changed because of because of birth control, right? It is fundamentally altered these dynamics in society. But at the same time, it hasn't either. Like I was saying, like birth control has altered the dynamics of sexuality and leading to what you said, promiscuity of women and this and things like that without as many consequences. But at the same time, it hasn't either, because women still have children today and still choose to have children today. And so, these lead to the same things. But yes, I agree with your fundamental point that needs to be talked about. It needs to be thought about because, we're still in the infant stages when you consider all of human history and how long it took to create these institutions. We're still in the infant stages of trying to reorganize ourselves in a helpful way where everything works out good in these social institutions, taking into fact that people can now have much more control over whether they will produce children or not. So that is something that has to be brought into the conversation. It is a dynamic factor, and one that kind of, you could say that the environment has changed, and thus the institutions and us, we need to change our fittedness, the way that we interact with the environment so that everything can go well. And we're still figuring it out, And so I agree, we need to talk about it. Need to be able to talk about it responsibly, openly, without all the political baggage and the shaming and all this stuff, the political correctness and things like that. And just realize that, most people just want things to go better, and it's okay to talk about it, right? Okay, no, so marriage does play a vital role in society's health, and arranged marriages aren't that bad. I wonder then why this culture has no place in today's society. Well, a big part of it is today's society has moved, the God of today's society, the focus of today's society isn't on society per se, right? It's on individual fulfillment. It's on what's good, what individuals want, and those kind of things. So that's even down to romantic relationships and marriage and things. Everything's turned towards your fulfillment and your happiness, which tends to just go down to kind of romance and pleasure, what it gets reduced down to, right? And so if things get reduced down to that, then that's why marriages can be entered into and exited, because if the pleasure and the romance and the personal fulfillment of the person isn't there, then it has no purpose, so end it and enter into another one, and we can pretend that everybody will be happy with that. But the problem is, of course, that we are not individual beings. We're not if we focus on our individual fulfillment, we actually end up not being too fulfilled because we're too tied into each other, into communities and families and societies. And so that's why, the solutions for the future have to get more away from this individual focus and fulfillment focus and more towards what I've been trying to show. Because I am all about the individual as well, right? It's just that we've gone way too far down that road, and I'm trying to show how these community institutions and these social dynamics used to work and get us more back thinking in terms of that, so we can reestablish our communities, reestablish these institutions, at least in small pockets of community around us. I think that's the only way to do it, is build it back from the ground floor up. There's not giant political solutions or something like that. That's the last place we should look to, is to solve things politically. Because as I've said many times before, politics uses force. It uses violent force. It uses force at the point of a gun. And I'll make a whole video on that someday, explaining and making my point of why that works. And so who likes to be forced? Nobody. Which is why the last place we should be looking to solve any of this stuff is in these political ways. But of course, that is where everybody thinks it has to be solved, is at that level. Christian Nimmo, Gary, have you read A Billion Wicked Thoughts? It's a really interesting insight into people's sexuality based on internet searches. Obviously not for kids, but well written. And yeah, interestingly enough, Christian, sitting over here gathering dust, is A Billion Wicked Thoughts. Yeah, so I have, and that's where I was getting some of this data when I was making claims about women's sexuality. And so it was sitting there. It's been gathering dust for months, but I finished it. I was going to talk about it at some point, but it hadn't yet, and that'd be a good one to talk about soon. So thanks for bringing that up. I used to do this newsletter called Standing Stone. Maybe some of you are here because of that, where I suggested books and media articles and things. And I hope you see that this stream has become that. I'm always suggesting particularly books, because that's where I get the most deep insights. In the future, I will also suggest things like articles and movies, and well, movies you can tell I use a lot as well, but not just movies, but music and everything. All these things I want to kind of just suggest and try to show you the best things that I've found. But anyway, thanks for giving me that opportunity, Christian, to bring that up. Now, Sarah Nuila, that name seems familiar. Now, that's my wife, guys. Says, would you care to expound on how women's emotions ebb and flow like the ocean's currents? And she has a wink on that because here at Mission Top, in recent days, emotions of sort have been flowing like ebbs and currents in ways that, I'll maintain the privacy of, but I'll basically just say, ocean currents, or emotions have been ebbing and flowing like ocean currents here in Mission Top, especially in the feminine domain. So thank you for that comment, Sarah Nuila, my wife. I'll see you in a few minutes. Christian Nimmo, also said, haha. And again, thank you, Christian, for all your comments. They're always welcome. Wiss is here. Wish you could have been here for this one. Chase, a friend of mine, says, I feel like the song Where Have All the Cowboys Gone by Paula Cole should be playing in the background. Yeah, that's good. Like, suggest stuff like this, guys. I think it'd be good for everybody to have things like this. Yesterday, I suggested that song by James Brown, A Man's World. I hope you listen to it and see how it brought in that, the forward-facing kind of masculine, but then brings in on the back and shows you that all the while, underlying the whole world is the hidden feminine, and the world wouldn't be anything without it. So hopefully you check that out. I actually have another James Brown song to suggest today, and that would be the song Sex Machine. For obvious reasons, and you can laugh at that, but go, once again, James Brown, he gets this stuff, he embodies this stuff, he feels this stuff. Go listen to the lyrics of that. They're super simple, but you'll see that they summarize in a simple package everything we've been talking about today. So we've got Where Have All the Cowboys Gone, suggested by Chase, and Sex Machine by James Brown, suggested today. Tim R. says, David Dida, and yes, and yeah, we brought him up a couple times on this podcast. I found value, particularly in his book, The Superior Man, particularly in his suggestions. Again, I'll kind of reiterate his suggestions of how men can interact with women. Why women can be contradictory sometimes, or the feminine can. Because, of course men can be contradictory too. It's not like these things are these rigid, static categories. But yeah, women can be like this. They can ask men to conform to impossible contradictions and things like that. And so what I valued about David Dida's book, especially the Superior Man, is he has some very good understandings and suggestions of how you take that kind of impossible situation, that raging ocean of and ebbing and flowing of women's emotions and demands, and how you can calm that and channel that and turn it into something rather beautiful. So it's a book I recommend, but I've also put in the caveat that I don't particularly like everything about David Dida's approach to the world. It gets a little too new agey for me. But there's some things that turn me off, but plenty of value in it too. So I would recommend that book, and people can go as far down his thought as they find value in. Stefan saying, hi Gary, interesting topic and discussion. As usual question, how do the Tinders of today's world change, transform, or ruin those traditional games of love between women and a man? So yeah, certainly they have. I mean, I would say it, in a way, of course, we want men to be more sexually active and assertive like we've brought out today, but those kind of game dynamics, you see how it gamifies it, right? It changes into a game. I'd say changes the game to be too easy, right? It doesn't demand the same kinds of things from people. So when you go in there and in a low stakes way, you can just kind of shuffle until, as I understand the nature of Tinder is, suddenly somebody agrees to essentially hook up with you, or at least, the possibility is much higher there. again, I just think that game, it doesn't do enough to actually create growth in a person in the process of a game. So it's more like a video game, you could say, right? Video games have these game dynamics that are just intoxicating and get people into the flow state, and they're fun and engaging. But then you exit the game and into the real world, and there's no transfer of growth that occurred. If there was, video games would be incredible. We'd all be on them, just progressing as humans constantly. And I see Tinder a bit of making this into more of a video game dynamic than kind of a social institution game dynamic where the result of the game is that everything has benefited and become better. So I'll probably think of something better to say about that, by tomorrow, because that's the way these things always work. But for now, that's what comes to mind on that question. We had a comment from Miguel Ansa. Again, I'm happy to see new people on here. I hope, sex always is an attractive topic, and I can understand why. So I'm glad that you guys have, some new contributors have come in on this. But I think we have reached the end of comments, questions, all those things. And so we will wrap this up now. Thank you for being here today. You can tell, these are topics that I love to think about, but I hate to just keep them to myself. I love to engage with other people about them. I've talked how I'm still kind of investigating Clubhouse, see if there's a way that we can get kind of a pool of invites to that we could invite everybody on there and kind of create even a more vigorous dynamic. Not to completely replace this, but just offer a new possibility of how we could engage about this stuff with more actual kind of conversation possibilities about that. So I'm still exploring that, just trying to figure that out. Maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't. But otherwise, like I said, I'll be back tomorrow with another stream, and these streams go Monday through Friday at 11 o'clock Montana time, and I'll continue doing those for at least the next 2 months. And after that, we'll see where that goes from here. I want to get more regular videos out. You guys hear me saying that all the time. These streams have actually made it kind of hard to do that. But hopefully I'm constantly trying to figure that out. And also as we lead out of doing so many of these streams, it should lead me both with the kind of impetus and the time to get more of those kind of videos out. And these streams will have helped to really hone and form the ideas for these kind of things. If there's anything, if you found value out of this and you want to do anything for this channel, if you could just, talk about this, suggest this, to anybody for which it might be of value of. I would like to see this grow and these ideas get out there. I mean, that's the whole notion about these ideas, is I would like them to be considered, at least. I'm not about trying to, get people to think the way that I do, but it's just things that I've found valuable. I'd like them to at least be out there into the conversation. And so the more we could do that as a community and get that out, the more I'd appreciate. Things have been growing. By the way, from this kind of daily effort as far as people that are paying attention to this channel. So that's a good thing. And hopefully good things will continue to come from that. Okay, well, that's all there is to say for today. Again, thank you for being here, and we'll see you back next time.